Okay, most preachers, and Mary may well relate to this, most preachers are magpies. We're always on the hunt for shiny little word treasures, things we can incorporate into our talks and sermons. When I was in ministry for 12 years or so in a church, every single week I'd have to kick out at least 2 sermons, one in the morning, one in the evening. That's about 20, 25 minutes. There might be a ladies' fellowship somewhere in the area or a talk to them. There might be a wedding. There might be a funeral. So you could have even 5 or 6 talks. And that's a lot of preparation, week in, week out, an awful lot of content and an awful lot of ideas to get. So I became quite fastidious. I've got lots of little notes and bits of paper and all sorts of things shoved in my study area, in the drawers, in the shelves, with everything that I write down, whether it's a joke, I might come across a good joke, it might be an object illustration for children, it might be something that happens domestically, it could be all sorts of things. I think, oh, I'll write it down. It could be something really good that a preacher said, maybe just a nugget. And so I've got lots and lots of stuff just in case it might come in handy for one of my sermons. It can be quite annoying living with me though. There's been quite a few times where something's happened at home, maybe one of those funny laugh out loud moments, and Emma's given me a really stern look and said, "Don't you quote me in one of your illustrations." Or I've seen the kids sort of like shaking their heads when I've said something in the kids' talk, and it's about one of my children. But I can share this. This is something I wrote down on my pad that came to my thinking as I prepared this talk. I went to a service, and the preacher, about 10 years ago, he closed the service with what I felt was a really powerful prayer, a kind of an exhortation. And I went home, I tried to memorize it, so I thought, that's great. One day I think I'm going to use that. And I wrote it down. And this is what he said. "May the Christ in me see and honor the Christ in you. And may the Christ in you see and honor the Christ in me." What if that was our expectation every single time we met somebody else? What if it was the underlying attitude in our party politics, in our national elections, in our leadership elections, in our debates? What if it was the foundation for our marriages, for our parenting, for our friendships? What if every religious and theological debate began with that? And I've seen some ding-dongs. I've seen Christians arguing in ways that are very ungodly. What if we recognized that something of God's image is in everyone, no matter how they behave or what they've done, and we honored them for that? Not the paper they read, not the party they vote for, not the opinions they hold, not even if they serve our God, another God, or no God at all. How would that change you if in every interaction that was your underlying premise? Maybe, and I did suggest before I read the text, that we try and place ourselves in the shoes of a Pharisee. Maybe it would help us to begin to step out of those rather stiff, starched, self-righteous, judgmental shoes of a man standing next to the tax collector, and heal us of our Pharisaism. Now, I don't know if Pharisaism's a word. I don't know if you do, Rob, or anybody else. It sounded like a really good word, and it kind of said what I wanted to say, so I wrote it down anyway. I may just have coined a brand new term. But when I say Pharisaism, I'm not talking about Israel. I'm not talking about Judaism. I'm talking about that black and white human tendency to codify, to narrow our thinking into being about just one way, which, let's face it, tends to be our one way. Pharisaism, it's a human condition that affects everyone and every religious tradition. And I believe it's as real today as it was when Jesus told this story. And it deceives us. It helps us to see ourselves as righteous and other people, well, we view them with contempt. And we can express that contempt in all sorts of different ways. I mean, just in the wider church now, we hear people saying of either individuals or groups, oh, they're just woke. Or they're liberals. Oh, those liberals. Or those lot, they're just happy clapper boomers. Or whatever. They're fundamentalists. We use all these terms to narrow our thinking, to judge and to show contempt. And that's just referring to other Christians. Is there anyone here immune from Pharisaism? I mean, I'm certainly not. When I play the Pharisee, the one right way is always my way, or my family's way, or my political party's way, or my culture's way, or perhaps my generation's way. When I feel especially stubborn and self-righteous, which, as Emma will tell you, occurs on a relatively frequent basis, I become obsessed with having my own way. But what about God's own way? Am I so arrogant as to assume that my way usually accords with God's best way? What about that humble, dying to self way that Jesus showed us? Surely I can't claim to be a true follower of Jesus when I keep wanting to have it my own way. A couple of years back, I was sad to see the demise of Robbie Coltrane, a very good Scottish actor. Reading all the obituaries, it spoke about him playing Hagrid in the Harry Potter series. But I think being a bit longer in the tooth, I always equated him with Cracker. Remember Cracker? Yeah, for those of us who are a bit older, you probably don't remember Cracker, you too. So that was Fitz. He was a criminal profiler, so a psychologist, criminal profiler. He consulted with the Manchester police. Cracker, and there were other TV series at the time during the 90s that introduced us to these forensic profiling psychologists. And it's where detectives and psychologists, they take lots of external data that they know about an as yet unidentified perpetrator. And they try to get a sense of what the person who it is might be like. So their gender, their social class, their age, their personality type, their lifestyle. In a way, it's their professional job to do what our Sunday school teachers told us never to do. Their job is to judge a book by its cover. Now, although relatively new in crime detection, profiling, it's not new to humankind. In fact, it's ancient. But while it's very good for crime detection, I think our Sunday school teachers were right. It's not great for living out our faith. And I think the Pharisee in our story, who I asked us to try to relate to at the start, I think he was probably a superb profiler. I bet his observation skills were brilliant. He could look at somebody just for a few external ideas, look at their clothing, their accent, their actions, their behaviors, all sorts of things, and make conclusions and judgments on their worth, their value, their holiness, their motives, their desires. And of course, human nature being what it is, the conclusions would always be in favor of the Pharisee and against the person being profiled. And isn't that exactly what our Pharisee is doing in Luke's story today? He said, God, I thank you, but I'm not like other people. Thieves, rogues, adulterers, or even this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give 1/10 of all my income. Thank you, but I'm not like them, and that I do it the right way. And it's that one line that really stuck in my head, and I've underlined it in my diary, my Bible, sorry. Thank you that I am not like them. Don't we all have lots of them that we thank God that we're not like? Now, the Pharisee only sees the outside of a tax collector, but the outside of a tax collector, to be fair, is pretty despicable. We know that they're not like the HMRC today. They're not sort of people who wear ties who just get on and do their job. They were thugs, they were traitors, they were gangsters. They'd hire heavies to go and beat people up. And they would often go for the low-hanging fruit, so they'd often get it from the people who would be most easily intimidated into giving up their wealth. So they were really awful people. Now, one commentator on his passage, a chap called Martin Dale, he tries to give this parable a modern perspective. He said, if Jesus were telling this story today, he'd find the most despicable person he possibly could. Say, I don't know, someone who regularly mugged old ladies for their pension books or whatever. And he'd hold them up as the person the Pharisee was standing next to. So the Pharisee, he sees that despicable outside, but he's got no ideas of the hopes and the fears of what's going inside. He doesn't know the dreams and the aspirations of a tax collector, the pain and the struggles. In fact, he's no idea that he and the tax collector might be far more alike than he dare even begin to appreciate. As I wrote this the other day, I had to stop and ask myself the question. There's actually quite a lot of me in the Pharisee and the Pharisee in me. And what about you? Have you ever been the Pharisee? Have you ever profiled another person? So Pharisaic profiling, it's so natural, it's so human, but it separates us from the other, from the thems. We raise ourselves up and we put them down. We make ourselves more and we make them less, which makes us feel a bit better in the process. But of course, this is the very opposite of Jesus' teaching. We know from the Sermon on the Mount and elsewhere that we're to forgive and love our enemies, whether or not they deserve it. Deserving doesn't come into it. We're to put ourselves lowest and last. We're to get down on our metaphorical knees and wash those feet. And yet, the vast majority of us, as people of faith, we still fall into this trap again and again of profiling the other, thanking God that we're not like them, judging books by the covers, by what they've done, separating ourselves by our self-righteous attitudes. And it can be in gentle ways. It might just be a perfectly reasonable yet slightly judgmental post on Facebook, say. Or a pretty funny, slightly sarcastic quip to a friend about somebody else we know and one of their personality quirks. Which is okay if we don't mind being on the end of that ourselves. But speaking for myself, sometimes I give it, but I don't like being on the end of the joke where I'm not laughing. So why do I still find myself relating to the Pharisee more than is good for me, more than is comfortable for me? Well, I think it's because the little Pharisee in me, and perhaps the little Pharisee in you, it feeds on our fears. So we stand in the shoes of a Pharisee in Jesus' story, and we look sideways at that person at the altar, that them, that other, and perhaps we fear them because they're a stranger. We don't really understand them. We fear maybe being supplanted. We fear not being enough. We fear being hurt. We fear, and then like the Pharisee, we profile the people who we fear. And we thank God that we're not like them. But what if there's another way? What if we just chose to throw out the profile? So throw out that profile that we've carefully, unconsciously collated about that person next to us, that other. And what if we simply wondered what's behind the outside? What untold stories behind their face, their expressions, their behaviors? Wonder what it's like to stand in their shoes. Wonder what's like to struggle with their fears and their desires. Or better yet, if it's appropriate, if we're not being too nosy and there's an opportunity to talk, maybe we could even ask them, what's your story? What's it like being you? What are your dreams? What do you fear? Where does it hurt? What do you need? I think if I more consistently, mindfully, open myself up to the old guy at the metaphorical altar, that tax collector, and if I chose to identify with him, if I wondered more what's behind the surface, if I asked questions, and if I truly tried to love him as God has commanded, if I allowed the Christ in me to see and honor the Christ in him, would I still stand far off and think, oh, I'm so glad I'm not them? I don't think I could then. And I don't think you could either. Instead, maybe, just maybe, we'll find those first seeds of love starting to grow. Maybe a little bit of empathy. And we'd reach out. Because that's exactly what God did in Jesus. We're coming up to the time where we celebrate the incarnation, aren't we? Where God literally stepped out of heaven and stepped into our world. God, through Jesus, chose to see what it's like to look through our eyes, to feel with our hands, to love with our vulnerable human hearts. Are we unwilling to do that ourselves? Christ asks us to do as he's done, to try and step out of our shoes every now and again, to step into the life of somebody else, especially the somebody else we struggle with, and begin to wonder a little bit more. So to wrap it up, the Pharisee, the chap who we normally instantly go against when we first read this chapter, we're not like the Pharisee. Of course we're not. We're like the repentant tax collector, are we? But the Pharisee, although he's a bit of a boo-hiss character, this religious VIP is not really a bad person. He's not wrong or more worse than the tax collector. The Pharisee is no worse than you or I. But he's afraid. He's afraid to face the truth of his own life, so he justifies himself. And the tax collector, he's not intrinsically better than the Pharisee. He's just more honest with God and with himself. He's not standing on the pedestal. He hasn't got the time to profile the chap next to him because he's too busy trying to ask God to sort him out. And it's the choice that God's given us. I think when we read this story, and I think this is what Jesus wanted us to do, at least in part, is to see that we've got the choice of these two shoes to step in. He's inviting us. He's suggesting that we're all perhaps like that judgmental Pharisee, and is inviting us to step into the shoes of the chest-thumping, repentant, honest and vulnerable tax collector. And it's a choice we have every single time we need to have another human being, whether it's a friend, family member, even somebody we don't like. And it's a choice we've got as we leave this place and we encounter all those people we're going to meet in the week ahead. So may the Christ in me recognize and honor the Christ in you. And may the Christ in you recognize and honor the Christ in me. Amen.